So, a warm welcome again to Dr. Sophia Hage.
Hi. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, so
My pleasure.
what what is expected in the new normal? I guess what will be of most importance is the health protocol, the hygiene protocols. And
Okay.
I was just talking about this with a colleague friend of mine who's also a doctor, and we were discussing about how for us medical doctors, it is part of our norm when we're practicing, whether it's in a hospital or whether it's in a clinic, to always prioritize safety and hygiene. And that
Okay.
includes wearing medical gloves, washing your hands, and in fact, in every room, the doctor's consultation room, there has to be a sink so that you can wash your hands before you touch a patient and after you touch a patient. So, in a way, I think it's about bringing that kind of hygiene level
Mhm.
to our daily life, where it's not only in a healthcare facility that you see hand sanitizers, where you wash your hands often. In that aspect, now we are adding the masks, where it's compulsory for everybody to wear a mask. So I guess it's bringing that kind of health protocol and sanitation level into our daily lives, and I guess that's the challenge, because at a certain level, who's going to control it, and
Mhm.
um, in terms of implementation, how are we making sure that those protocols are being executed well?
Right. So, is it just that though, Doc? Is it just washing your hands and is it just washing your hands, wear a mask in public, and just be mindful and bringing that clinical level of cleanliness to non-clinical settings? Is it just that? That's the answer? And
No,
then,
that's not the only answer. That's one of the most important aspect of it, and
okay.
something that we can, I guess, something that we can control in a way, right? Because I believe that in terms of where our country is right now, it's very easy for us to feel helpless or hopeless.
Okay.
But there are certain things that you can control. So that's one of the most important thing. And the second is basically to, as much as you can, to be physically distance or socially distance in a way that wherever you are, whether it's in a public place or in a workplace setting, that you can still be in around proximity around 1 to 2 meters away from another person. Now, in this aspect, it then becomes important for the workplace situation or the workplace policy to be able to accommodate a limited amount of people in a closed room, because in terms of risks in the environment, there's low risk, moderate risk, and high risk. Now, the lowest risk would be where you're in an outdoor situation where um, circulation is guaranteed, and you can keep a distance more than 2 meters from another person. Now, that's the low risk situation, right? Now, moderate risk is usually one, whether it's outdoor, but with a number of people that you cannot control. Like, for instance, if you're taking public transportation, even though it's a short amount of time in a public transportation, but if you can control the number of people, then it's still moderate risk because the ventilation or the circulation is not very ideal, but you can control one aspect. And likewise, if it's an outdoor situation, but you cannot control the number of people, so that's considered moderate risk. Now, high risk is where you're in a closed room or a closed environment where the circulation is not as easy breezy as an outdoor situation, and where it's very difficult to be constantly in a 2 meter distance with one another, and you're in that environment for a prolonged period of time. Now that's high risk. That's why in this situation, a gym or a sports facility that is indoor is considered high risk because of the characteristics of the environment.
Okay, so that's I'm glad that you broke that down. So
Mm,
public transportation, places where it's not possible to have more than 2 meters distance. I mean, let's just imagine that covers quite a broad range of things. For example, schools, you
yeah.
know, kids going back to school, and it's very difficult to tell children, remember to be 2 meters distance apart
Hmm.
from your friends. They don't come to school to be 2 meters apart from their friends. They come to
Exactly.
school so that they could hug each other, they could talk to each other, sit next to each other. And yeah, so that's one. That's
Hmm.
as a parent, that's something that's always predominant of concern for me. And just on going back to the gym for me is now, it's unimaginable for me to go back to the gym handling weights where it's, I mean, of course you know there's now new protocols where people are wiping down weights and cleaning out after every session and limiting the number of people that can come in any given time. But what about like Indonesian weddings? Like Indonesian weddings are 1,000 people
Mm.
easily, 10,000 people. So now what? Virtual Zoom wedding for the rest of time, and it could be a good thing. It could cut cost quite a bit
Yeah,
for.
yeah, yeah. So you don't have to spend so much on partying.
That's right. So if you
Right.
got married in Indonesia prior to 2020, either congratulations or bad luck, the fact that you had a big wedding. And then if you want to get married after 2020,
Yeah.
after Corona, it's now
It's a whole
just
different
you.
world.
Yeah, you, the spot, and then like, or the civil service, and then a whole lot of Zoom family members, and that's probably about it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so basically, no more hotel buffets,
Mm.
right? Right? I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, can you imagine going to a hotel buffet now? Like,
Basically, if you go out, you have to have two things in mind. One, you have to be as much as you can to not touch anything, right? So no physical touch, and then physical
okay,
distancing as well, and then wearing masks and like complete hygiene protocol. So in that
okay,
sense, yes, buffet is very high risk. There's one study that there's one demonstration that highlights the danger of a buffet. So they put a sort of a paint. I think some kind of paint where it will show in UV light but not natural light. They put it in the hand of one person, and then this person goes into a buffet setting, and then at the end of the buffet setting, they showed with the UV light how many people actually have the paint on their body or face or hands. Now, um, all of them have parts of the paint in their
right,
hands. And I
right.
think there are a few, more than a couple of people who actually have it on their face. So yes, a buffet is a nightmare in this situation because
Oh, you cut
you
out.
share the
I can hear you.
utensils, right? You use the same
Okay,
spoon or fork to actually pick up food, and in a
Dr.
situation where you're
Sophia.
socializing, you touch your face, you talk to people. Sometimes you touch them as well physically. So in that sense, a buffet setting is a
The
very high
nightmare.
risk. Yes, a very
It's
high
just a
risk.
nightmare.
Just avoid it. Yes, and
Well,
in that sense, a school, and the reason why IDAI, Ikatan Dokter Anak Indonesia, is actually speaking very loudly against school starting in July, is because it is also a nightmare. Like you said, you cannot really tell kids to not touch their face. you can't really tell kids to stay away from their friends, minimum 2 meters. In these kind of situations, it's almost impossible to maintain the level of hygiene protocol and physical distancing. And so, opening up schools in July in the situation where, one, we don't have a vaccine yet, two, even if we look at the curves, the positive number of cases are not really going down, is a nightmare for the kids and also for parents.
Right. Well, one, they can get sick, and or even if they don't get sick, they can become carriers. So, Dr. Sophia here is referring
Yes.
if you haven't what she's referring to is the interview recently with IDAI director Dr. Aman Pulungan,
Yes, Dr.
and
Aman
so
Pulungan.
ya Dr. Aman Pulungan, dokter anak, spesialis dokter anak yang had basically voiced this. He voiced the very strong concerns about the risk of infection, particularly for young children. This his opinion runs counter to the original belief that no children are not high risk
Mm,
uh, towards the coronavirus. So there's a lot of things as we progress into this pandemic situation that the doctors themselves are revising, and their discoveries are affecting policy, obviously. So, and as you mentioned about also recently, there was a statement from Departemen Pendidikan whether the school's going to reopen in July. Um, yeah, so a lot of conflicting news saying,
mm,
yes, academic year can begin again in July, but does not mean that the children return physically to school.
yes.
So, and then some of the arguments saying, well, better that you postpone the academic year by one full year. A lot of parents are up in arms about also their children losing one academic year. It's interesting because a lot of things become moot at this
Yeah.
point. You know, what is a university degree, or like
Hmm.
in terms of like your schedule of a timeline for graduating by a certain date. Um, if you may, like if you run the risk of becoming sick, and I don't know. I mean, that's a larger conversation possibly
Yeah.
that we can take in this interview, but certainly it's noteworthy that there's a lot of repercussions of the lockdown.
Hmm.
Not just the lockdown. Um, is it the repercussions of just the lockdown, or is it more of how do we deal with the pandemic, which is the discussion of what is the new normal, right?
Yeah. So, the tricky part with Indonesia is that because we're already in the middle of it, and
Mhm.
our mistakes has started since the beginning of the pandemic. Because if other countries have a pandemic curve or an epidemiology curve where you can assess and you can really look into the data and take note of policies or actions that needed to be taken from the curve. Unfortunately, we don't have that kind of data. Our data is not rigorous enough, or even, I think, large enough for us to actually look into the curve and say, this is where we are right now, and this is the policies that we're going to take. And because of this alarming situation right now, that we really don't we really cannot rely on the data that we have right now, then the actions that are being considered is then based on what? That is I think that is the number one concern for scientists and data analysts, and especially healthcare professionals that are now looking at our country's policies. Because
Mm.
as much as we understand that our country cannot be on lockdown because of the economic implications and stuff like that, but there needs to be a certain, well, there needs to be a public health plan, or even policies that are based on data and situations where we are right now. So I think personally, as a healthcare professional, if because I get this question a lot as well from friends. Like, what do you do? Like, what do we do? Do we go on lockdown? When does this end? It's really hard to answer those questions because one, I don't think no anybody has the answers right now when this is going to end, and two, it's very hard because again we don't have a pool of data that we can trust. So at a certain level, yes, it can be very easy for us to feel helpless and hopeless, but at the at the other end of it, then what can we do as a community or as a person individually? And I guess in a way, Indonesia has always been, in that sense, very proactive. Like if the government is not present, we'll do something about it. And so in a way it's good, but in the other opposing factor, it's a little bit concerning that we actually have to be proactive in certain aspects of our daily
Yeah.
life.
Well, I guess, in the perfect world, we'd have better data sets.
Yes.
In a perfect world, we'd have more knowledge and more measure of what's happening. But it is what it is. We can criticize all day long, but uh, the fact is we have to make policies, or the government has to make policies based on what data that they have available. Whether they know more than they are letting on, that's also one thing.
Mm-hmm.
Because we also don't know whether it's the full picture that they know. I mean, maybe it's like the real truth is like, oh my god, it's so bad, like you better not know, okay? It's not what Ahmad Yuryanto comes up every afternoon at 5 p.m. That's all you want to know. Okay,
Yeah.
that's all that's good for you to know is that, and possibly we don't know that too, right? So
Hmm.
maybe they could be possibly operating on higher intelligence than we give them credit for, um, and even if it's not the case, and this is all the data that we have, and then so what,
Hmm.
right? Then the adaptation into this problem that we have collectively as a group of people, that's the more important conversation that we need to have, because as you mentioned, where there are gaps in policy, society will come up with a plug on
Yep.
how to respond to those issues. For example, at the beginning of the pandemic, there was a shortage of APD, the protective gear for the healthcare workers. The public responded in kind by giving donations, doing makeshift gears,
Yes.
um, creating alternative solutions for that. So the same ingenuity that came out of Bandung for the ventilators,
Mm-hmm.
the the ITB professor, the Indonesian Institut Teknologi Bandung, the Indonesia's MIT, basically. One of the professor that refused to lay down and not come up with an answer. He came up with how to make ventilators using rice cookers, because he
Mm-hmm.
said that's the one item that in Indonesia you can have is a rice cooker. So how brilliant is this man? And him and his students are all going to go to heaven. We just know that because they're all healthy and alive, thank you.
Yes.
But I mean, one day they'll go to heaven because they've dedicated so much of their care and attention. So I think there's always room for responding in the right way.
Yep.
And
Yep.
I think that's for me, I tend to stay away from, well, the government's not doing enough in X. Well, okay, so if we've identified the areas of opportunities and the gaps where we feel like there's lacking, so how do we respond to those things?
Exactly.
How do we troubleshoot? How do we problem solve? So we have a big problem with workforce going back to work. People, we got to make money. I mean, don't you have bills? I have bills.
Yeah, definitely. That's why we need
Bills
to.
don't stop.
Then we need to know what we can do in our daily life to
Right.
actually then start operating or start well living your life basically. And to
That's
a
right.
certain degree, that's where the rigorous hygiene protocols. That's where you bring your own set of utensils. You bring, in a way, it's good for the environment. You don't rely on things that is
Mhm.
generally for public use. Then you just bring your own and stuff like that. So yeah, it's a very tricky situation where we need to get used to it quickly, and the protocols and the physical distancing needs to be adhered to um, diligently.
Right.
Hmm.
Right. Okay. So you feel optimistic, hesitant, cautious. What's your mood? What's your sentiment about
Well, definitely cautious, I think. But it's
it?
it's it's not it's not it's not it's not a brooding mood. I guess it's not a depressive mood because we know how we know the steps that we at least some of the steps that we need to do. It's not like we have no clue whatsoever what to do, and in that aspect there's hope. Because then you're not helpless. You know the things that you can do, you know the things that you can control, and you do that. And in fact, in terms of going back to the workplace situation, um, on top of the hygiene protocol, us as a clinic, we're also talking to a lot of companies right now that is looking into rapid testing, so that now we see the possibility of, if usually it's like a medical checkup once a year, now maybe until there's a vaccine, there's going to be rapid testing every 2 weeks for employees. And that's going to be the new norm, because if you don't show up with a negative rapid test, you can be a carrier, right? So in that
Mhm.
sense, it's again, you look at it in what role you play in the community or in the society. If you're a family member, you look at it as there's a hygiene protocol before entering the house. And then if you're an employer, what kind of health procedures, protocols, or security level that you need to give your employees. And if you're
Mhm.
if you're somebody who's part of the workplace scenario as an employee, what can you do to mitigate the infection at the workplace? So in that sense, you look at it in the roles that you play in the society, and you do what
Mhm.
you can.
Okay. There's a lot there to absorb and to take in because the implication, the onus is on business owners to create the protocol sets and then adhere to them. There's no real hard set. I mean, who's monitoring it? I mean, who's the level of enforcement for new rule sets?
Hmm.
It's absolutely voluntary. It's an added cost for the business owner,
Yeah.
obviously. Um, yeah, so these are a lot of ongoing discussions of what's the right new normal for business owners and employees alike, because that's a two-way relationship. The employees also might demand it from the business
Hmm.
owners. Hey, demand the safer work protocols in the workplace, but at the same time, you know, it. to what extent is it the responsibility of the business owner to make sure all these things are being implemented? So that's one, and that definitely will impact the you know the success of businesses, right? Now imagine if you're like an F&B owner right now, right? You have to pay rent on your restaurants that have been empty for the last 10 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, you're essentially just a kitchen, if that, and you have to market. So there's a new and creative way of um, advertising and promoting your services. And for consumers like us, I mean, yeah, we want to get out of the house, but also sitting in a restaurant right now,
Mm.
big, that's no different than going to a buffet line for me, because that poses the same danger.
Yeah.
Or just adopt the mentality that, infect and infect quickly, across the public. I guess this is sort of what's being hinted as the herd immunity.
Yeah.
Um, Apa sih terjemahannya herd immunity, Doc?
Yeah, so herd immunity is basically a situation where the virus is present, but
Mhm.
70 to 60 to 70% is already immune to it. Now, this is only possible if 70 to 80% of the population already has it or is already vaccinated. That is why the use of the term herd immunity is personally, as a healthcare professional, I don't really like to use, because it implies that either everybody has it, or there is already a
Vaccinated.
vaccine, right? But we know that the vaccine is not going to be there at least in the next 12 to 18 months. Now,
Right.
in a situation where it's like Indonesia, where we're now learning to accept and adapt to the new normal, using the term herd immunity is, I think, a little bit inappropriate, because what we want is, we still want the infection to be mitigated. We do not want 70 to 80% of the population gets it, but we want the curve, the
Yeah.
infection curve, to not
To
be as
follow.
high, right? So that the healthcare facility can actually be present for those who has infection or who requires care, even critical care. Now that's the problem where I think I avoid the use of herd immunity and tend to use this term of new normal, where we know that there is no going back. There is no way we're going to be going to malls and watch a movie in a cinema. And there is no way in the near future we're going to be able to go to concerts the way we used to,
Mm,
concerts. So
right.
there's definitely going to be a lot of changes, and using this term new normal means we need to change and adapt, and that's how we're going to survive as a community. And to use the term herd immunity for me is like letting the virus spread out, when in fact that's not what we want, even in the new normal situation. So yeah.
Okay. So no. So don't infect and infect quickly,
Yeah,
because
don't infect
you don't
quickly.
know what you're talking about when you're asking for trouble.
Mm,
Yeah. So, and it is inviting trouble, isn't it? Like it's asking for
yeah.
a huge catastrophe. And of course, we're gonna have people. It's such a polarizing subject that we're gonna have people on all sorts of spectrums saying from, flatten the curve, don't, let's kill this virus, or and then all the way to infect and infect quickly. So we'll see who wins out, because I don't know. We're in Jakarta, so it seems like majority of people are observant.
Yeah.
But then I say that because it seems quieter in the city from where I sit in my home, or
Mm.
every once in a while when I go grocery shopping, it seems much quieter. Although not at the grocery store itself, the grocery
Yes.
store is busy. In fact, Grand Lucky in SCBD, that if you want to get sick, that's one place to go. The reason why I Grand Lucky, I love you. You have all the things, and I love you. I'm grateful for you, but it is jam packed in there.
Yeah.
We need to figure out maybe there is a rotation system,
Mm-hmm.
or like maybe 50 people at a time into Grand Lucky at any given time, and somebody counts the number of people that are in the supermarket, and maybe you time them the number of amount of time that they can be in there. These are my suggestions, Grand Lucky again. Um,
Well, yeah,
not the Grand Lucky.
rest assured, we're actually now talking to Grand Lucky for the health protocol side. So they're actually
Are
reaching
you?
out, and we're actually talking to Grand
Are
Lucky.
you really?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So Royal
Okay.
Sports Performance Center and Royal Progress Hospital is actually now working together with Renlucky for them to start implementing health protocols and certain physical distancing protocols in their supermarket.
See?
You're the first to hear
See?
this.
No, you hear me? I love you, Grand Lucky. Okay. And yeah, so that's one. I mean, yeah, so there's just a lot of things to adapt to in the new normal. I as a private citizen in Jakarta, it seems as if people are observant, but then I watched the news saying that in Pasar Minggu area or in Tanah Abang,
Mhm.
it's still quite crowded. People are not fully 100% like normal, but it's coming back to normal. Obviously, we've all seen the footage of the markets that are busy again, and some of the malls opened up in different cities, and people just rush through. So I think people are just feeling so stressed, maybe that they feel like they need to go back out there and just feel like reclaim some bit of normalcy to what they know previously. Um, but yeah, at what expense is really now moving forward. So what at what expense for the rest of us?
Mhm.
You know. So I mean, what's next, Doc?
What's next is we adapt. What's next is we, as much as we can, if we're lucky enough to be able to still work from home, then it's best to still work from home. I know a few of my friends who are in a position in their workplace that allows them to work from home, and they will still going forward, even though the PSBB is now going to be lifted in the early June, 4th of June, right?
Okay.
They're still choosing to work from home. And I know several business owners that can actually shift their employees so that they come into the workplace in shifts, so not all the amount of people at the same time. That helps as well. And of course, personal hygiene protocol, sanitation protocol, and
Mhm.
as much as we can, whenever we come home, we protect those that we love. So again, coming into the house, do not touch anything. Throw away the stuff that you got from outside as much as you can, such as bills and stuff like that. Sanitize as much as you can the bag that you use outside, and sanitize shoes, sandals, and don't touch anything. Go straight away to the bathroom, take a shower, and then hug your loved ones, because it's really difficult if you don't know whether you're a carrier or not. It becomes very easy to just transmit the disease and become the source of infection for your home, or at your house,
Mm.
which is what we are trying not to do.
All right, you heard it from the doctor, so you all know what to do, and that is, in sum, the new normal for us is to be cautious, to be wary, to be clean, clinically clean, that is, there's a lot of guidance out there in terms of how to conduct a cleanup protocol coming into a home. So, yeah, let's hope that the curve flattens soon for Indonesia
Yep.
and then we can reassimilate. Dr. Sophia, thank you again for being on the show.
My pleasure.
Yeah, and we look forward to, well, I look forward to seeing you in person again.
Yeah.
And so hopefully that can happen sometime soon.
Hopefully so.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much, doctor.
Thank you so much, Tania. This has been a pleasure. And hopefully, this helps clear out certain things that people
Oh,
have
yeah.
about, worrying the new normal and
Yes.
stuff like that.
Yes. I definitely think that you've definitely addressed some of the major key issues of concerns there. Thank you again. Bye, doctor.
Bye.